We have different cultures, right? We can just ostensibly see this in the world. Look at like Black Americans, the kind of music they create, the way that they talk, the way they carry themselves, and just notice that it's different. Why is it different? Right? There's an obvious explanation for why it's different. Now, this is important because when you try to have a society, you want to build a society around a certain amount of consensus. Otherwise, you're fighting with one another. Otherwise, you're in a situation of battles between people with different mentalities and different views. And this creates conflict, and this ends up destroying and undermining the capability for your society to actually embody any values at all, or if it does, it becomes oppressive. One group oppresses the other, and this produces a cycle of conflict, and this is bad for everyone. So you want to have a society in which people are more similar, if possible, so that we can have a similar idea of the kind of way of life that we want to have. This was the idea behind Australia when it was created. It was created as a white ethno-state. The first thing the Australian government ever did was introduce a bill to the parliament. The first thing that ever happened in Australian political history as Australia's independent state was a bill before the parliament to deport non-whites from Australia and to institute an immigration policy that prevented non-whites from immigrating here. That was literally the first thing our country ever did. It was a liberal democracy, by the way. It embodied all of these values that Drew apparently defends. They didn't black bag anyone. They weren't this totalitarian genocidal regime. They were simply trying to preserve a population that shared a culture and shared a way of life. And this produced an amazing country. Australia became one of the most prosperous and wonderful places to live in the entire world. We built beautiful cities. We built a paradise on earth by comparison to the rest of the world. Australia is still, even despite the fact that it's declined to a very large extent, is still a paradise compared to the vast majority of the world. And it's because of white people building it with our values, these liberal democratic values that Drew claims to believe in. They were created by white people, right? They were actually, he believes in stuff that white people created, that's an expression of our culture, our civilization. And it produced a free, open, incredible society where we could have scientific innovation, where we could have economic development, and we could have peace. And the reason why we could have all of these things was because of the people, right? Things don't just happen magically. Things happen because people do things. Now, why do people do things? Well, because it's their nature to do things, which then gets us back to a discussion of race and genetics. So the point that I'm making is, I don't believe in what's called magic dirt theory. I don't believe if you get a bunch of Sudanese people and you just move them into Australia, that they magically become Australian, right? They'll all of a sudden become like Russell Coight or something. They'll all become like, it's standard Aussie. They won't just adopt our values, adopt our way of life, and just start behaving like Australians. No, because they're not physically predisposed to do that, right? They just simply don't have that nature. They have the nature of being Sudanese. And if you want to know what it's like to have a country full of Sudanese people, look at Sudan. That's what it's like. It's not great.
I want to clarify, because I want to give Drew here a chance to rebuttal this. So you're making an argument about the genetic predisposition towards our genes, which would be our race, right, or our shared collective genetic background, does determine the way we think, we process, and our demeanor, our behavior. That collective behavior then defines a society, and that society defines our legacy. And so that's why there is a particular bent or type of bent around the world. And I just want to know, are you saying that's the main driving factor behind what makes a country great? Or as many people would say, well, Africa's actually, disadvantaged because of colonialism, right? There's a lot of other factors people would bring up. I don't need to list them all here. Before I go,
Africa's disadvantaged because it's full of Africans. Sub-Saharan Africa, before white people showed up, they hadn't even invented the wheel yet, right? So they can point the finger at the white man, but they couldn't even invent a fucking wheel until we showed up, okay? So whose fault is it for their lack of development? Whose fault is it for if Africa is far more prosperous today than it would be if we didn't exist, if we had just left it alone, they'd still be walking around. Like literally, they'd just be only walking around because they wouldn't have any machinery. They wouldn't have any other mode of transport other than walking around. That's how backwards these people were, right? So they should be getting down on their hands and knees and worshiping us for colonizing them, if anything. Now they've got electricity. They've got the capacity to not die of mass starvation. They've got all these incredible benefits of modern technology that they wouldn't have if it wasn't for us.
Drew, I mean, obviously you disagree. I just want to make sure that you hit on two notes there on